Yeah, make sure you have that 2004 version before you try to run those PowerShell commands. If you don't have the correct version, what happens is VM workstation disappears. It doesn't like running 64-bit operations after that. But that's good. And Jacob's joined us. Morning, Jacob. Yeah, so just type in the update command in your toolbar down the bottom. Down here, just do an update and check for updates, and it'll eventually update to 2004, and then you can bring it up. All right. Good morning, everyone. For those that have just joined and for those watching the video, I've just been talking about a feature that I was playing with for virtualization natively in Windows, and the look up Network Chuck on YouTube, and if you've got the correct version of Windows, you can run some commands and run Linux natively as an application within your Windows 10, which is very, very good. And it comes up as an application on your, you just click on it, boom, there it is. There's Linux virtual machine running just by clicking a button after you've done the install systems. It is going to be quite a bit of a game changer for getting things done in virtual machines, and I'll certainly be pushing our IT department to update our image for our ICT PCs to have the correct version, so we can make use of this feature in a lot of our courses moving forward. So that's going to be interesting, but it'll take me a while to convince our IT department to update our ICT training computers. All right, let's get stuck in today's chapter, chapter 8, all about printers, different types of printers, basically how they work, how to set them up and sharing them, and then just like every chapter we have the troubleshooting process. So basically each type of printer will have a slightly different maintenance method, but your basic troubleshooting steps are going to be the same regardless of the printer, because if you follow the 6-step process, you'll it works on anything and everything. So as long as we step through that, again, we'll be fine. So types of printers. The most common one at home these days would be an inkjet printer. In business, we've been on laser printers for a number of years. impact printers, where you actually have ink ribbon with works like the old-fashioned keyboard, where a key would actually strike against the paper, making an indent on the ink ribbon and pressing the ink onto the paper. The new one that's been the rage for the last couple of years has been the 3D printers, making different models and objects using plastic normally. And then in a lot of retail businesses you have thermal printers. Faxes also work with thermal technology, so they apply heat to print the characters. And the downside to thermal is they do fade quite rapidly. Alright, speed, quality and color functions vary across the board, and basically speed's measured in pages per minute and the quality is in dots per inch. Now, when we're looking at color, we basically have cyan, magenta and yellow to make up the colors, and then lasers also run black, same with the Inkjet's specific color as well. Now, if it's a black and white printer, it will do grayscaling for tonal changes for the various colors, of which I'm sure you're all familiar with now. Excuse me. Reliability and total cost of ownership is looked at over the lifespan of the device, and it includes the initial purchase price, cost of consumables, and running costs, so prices per page, number of pages per month that you would normally go through, how often you have to do maintenance on the device, and any warranty costs and repairs that come into effect. So there's quite a few items that come in the total cost. Now, most people don't even think about those items when purchasing a machine for a home, because these days even laser printers for the home, when you're talking about an A4 black and white laser, about $50, $50 to $80, and you can get a printer. All right. Now, what they sting you with is not the initial purchase, it is the consumables afterwards. So one of the guys I used to work with used to buy brand new printers, run them until about 80% of the initial cartridges or toner cartridges, and then he'd sell that printer as a second-hand printer on eBay and go out and buy a new one. And he would actually make money even after the cost of printing and selling and buying a new one. It was a strange cost of ownership cycle that he had going. So yeah. Automated document feeders, so they're generally on top of the printer, and basically what they are is a series of rollers that take a sheet from the feeder, roll it down into the scanning bed area, and then pick it up and roll it back out to the holding tray. And the more advanced ones will actually do double-sided, so they'll actually be able to turn the sheet upside down, basically flipping it over, and scan both sides and then spit it out. Now, this is great for when you've got big jobs to put through the scanner. Now, the other issue that comes along is they can get jammed quite a lot, and they're very sensitive to foreign objects. So, like staples, you've got to make sure you get them totally out of the way. And if your the source paper is bent, can cause jams as well, or if it's torn, anything that stops the paper from feeding smoothly through them can cause issues. Okay, inkjets come in different versions, but basically the way they work is they use a magnetic charge to pull just a droplet of ink out of the cartridge and onto your paper at a time, and this worked so fast. Pluses, very easy to set up and install, very easy to use. They're very much cheaper than their counterparts on the laser side, so you get a low cost, high resolution print coming out of them. The downside is the ink nozzles will clog quite regularly, especially if you don't use it all the time, because the ink tends to harden when not in use. And the paper can, depending on how much ink is required to get the image, can leave the paper being quite damp. If you're using high gloss paper for photo quality and that, it can take quite a while for the ink to dry, and if you're doing multiple prints where they feed out on top of each other, you'll get smudging occurring because of that. Downside with all these systems, like any other system in today's environment, is they hit you on the consumables, so your cartridges are going to be expensive. So the basic makeup of a printer, okay, you've got rollers that pick up the paper and start feeding it through, and they go through a series of rollers, and one of the series of rollers here is the duplex. This is to flip the paper over. Looking from top down, we'll have the cartridge holder here, and that generally runs back and forth across the width of the paper on a belt or pulley system, if you like. And depending on the system, we'll have a series of individual colors, most common which are black, cyan, magenta and yellow. Now, depending on the individual printer, they might have more, but this is the basic combo there that everyone will have at least. Black cartridges tend to be larger in size because they're more frequently used, and in the color system, the one that expires the quickest is yellow. Yellow seems to be used quite a lot. So cartridges and paper are your consumables, and then all the rollers and various pickups and paper handling are known as feeders, and they basically get the paper into position so that the ink head, which is underneath the color cartridges can form the droplets of ink on the paper. Okay. Now, depending on whether you're doing black and white or color, the pages per minute will vary greatly. And the other thing that plays into that is the resolution that you're printing at. Okay, moving on to laser printers. Again, advantages. Per page cost is lower. You have the ability to get very high speed pages per minute counts on lasers. They deliver high quality because the very focused beam for the lasers generating the field for the toner to stick to, and it goes through a heating element and it basically comes out dry. So you don't have a wet ink being placed on the paper. You have a dry tone, which is like a powder, placed on it, and it's magnetized via the heat from the laser, basically, and the heat fuses the toner to the paper. Oh, sinus is a kick in my butt this morning, sorry. The disadvantage is, generally speaking, the more featured laser printers will have a higher cost, especially when we're looking at corporate business grade printers. And just like with the inkjet cartridges, your toner cartridges for laser printers are where they wrap up all their profits. And again, they will have pickup rollers, duplexing assemblies, but what will happen is they'll have one, or if it's a color laser, they'll have 4 toner cartridges, just like with the inkjet. And what happens is it goes across the imaging drum where the toner is basically printed onto the paper, and it will then run through this fuser assembly, which will basically heat the affected toner and fuse it to the paper. So that just means it applies heat and basically melts the powder into the paper, and then it comes out dry. So this is the paper coming through. So basically you have the image coming down for the printing, and it'll charge the drum, which is what the toner is attached to. So you got the laser giving it a pinpoint precision of what it wants to print and changes the charge where it hits. The toner is rolled on to the drum, and it basically transfers across and goes through the fusing element to melt the toner in. Now, any excess toner that is still on the drum is scraped off basically, and then it just goes around. Now, if you're doing this, 20-30 pages per minute, you can imagine how fast all of this works. And when you're using lasers, when you pick up that fresh document, you'll feel the heat on it as well. Thermal printing is generally used in point of sales now. So your cash registers are all using thermal printing. So older fax machines also used the thermal printing method. And basically, a heat's applied via the printing head, which forms the image on the paper. The advantage of thermal is it has the ability to be used a long time because there's very little moving parts. Basically, all what you have to do is buy the thermal paper. It's very quiet because it's not striking anything. It's basically just the noise of the paper being strolled out. Downside is thermal paper can be expensive and it's got to be stored in a constant cool environment, because if it gets heat, some strange reason, it starts to go off and degrade. So there's that. So don't see these very often now is the impact printers, and most common of these was the dot matrix. The benefit of these were the ability for us to have continuous feed. Basically, we had a tear-off portion on the sides which had the feeding mechanism on them, and we could just print very large items on a continuous feed, and because you had to physically tear off each A4 page individually, because otherwise it was just a continuous strip. So pluses and minuses. Advantages: ribbons, relatively cheap. They could use plain paper or continuous feed, and you could have carbon copies done. So basically, you'd buy carbon copied feeder and it would just go through and it'd be making 2 or 3 copies at once, just on the fact that the impact would create it. Disadvantage of that impact was it made it noisy, very, very noisy. And generally speaking, because the quality depended on the number of pins used for impacting, so graphics were not very high on the resolution, and generally speaking, you had very limited color options. Generally speaking, you get maybe a dual color ink cartridge, well, ink ribbon really, black and red were the normal common ones. So you're very limited with graphic resolution and color options. Now, as we move on, we have a whole range of virtual options for printers now. So we can print to files, we can print to PDF, or we can even go straight out to an image. So most common virtual one that most people will use is printing to a PDF document and sending it on via emails or something like that. Cloud printing, well, I love this. All right, so basically I have an issue with cloud systems, mainly because the process of marketing behind the cloud solutions has given management the wrong idea of what cloud solutions can provide. They think that you just print to the cloud and you don't have to have a physical printer somewhere. It's been quite an interesting learning curve for businesses over the years on this. Yeah, some of the early discussions with management that had just been given a good blurb from a sales rep. Yeah, that's another story. Okay, so all what this means is we're printing to a printer queue in a remote location. So somewhere within our network, there is still a physical printer. We're just printing off, not directly to the printer, but to a printing queue, whether that be in the cloud from our service provider or possibly printing a batch to an external printer. Okay, so a printing service might give you access to their systems to remotely print for commercial printing purposes, like if you're doing flyers and things like that. And you have a corporate account with them to print large batches of advertising material and things like that. That's another example where cloud printing would come in. But it's just an extension of corporate printing queues. Instead of it being a local server, it's a remote server with a remote printer. 3D printers are basically using some form of media, normally with plastic, to mold an image out of. So basically it uses, in this most common one, plastic, melts it, and it forms a solid three-dimensional object as it builds it layer by layer as it comes up. Quite interesting to see in practice. So the filament is the plastic that, or other media. I have seen metal ones as well. So there's all sorts. I've seen concrete 3D printers, commercial concrete printers. That's so basically a filament comes into a feeder. It gets put through a nozzle, and the printing bed is underneath, and it'll basically raise and lower as it's building the model. And then your printing head is on an axis, so it can also move around in all directions. So you got the printer bed doing the y-axis, sorry, the z-axis, and the nozzle is doing X and Y. So they're quite interesting to see running, and you're pretty much restricted to what your imagination can build as far as that's concerned. Now, where are we? About halfway through. So, how to install a printer? It's pretty straightforward. You unbox it, take all the safety tabs off, and install your cartridges and so forth via whatever instructions come with that particular one. You connect the cable, if it's a wired printer, to your computer or your network, depending on whether it's an enterprise machine or not. Attach the power. You may need to install software drivers for the computer to recognize the printer. It's pretty much not an issue in today's environment with Windows 10, but the older printers and older operating systems, you definitely had specific printer drivers to be installed into your operating system for it to talk to your printer correctly. You then set it up for the correct paper size, whether it's grayscale or color, what resolution you're going to run it at, and whether you're going to have double-sided or single-sided documents. Now, as all our operating systems and that come, assuming that everybody is in America, they all come with American default letter sizes, so you have to change the paper size to suit. So, type of paper, most of them will be standard. Alright, if you're doing high quality images, you'll probably have gloss or photo paper in there just to give it that sheen. Then you need to change your print quality to match that and set color printing, black and white, grayscale printing, whatever you are printing on. So these configuration settings will be changed depending on what you're doing at the time. So for most people, they'll set it up for an A4 standard paper size with normal print quality, with grayscaling. Okay, so but in businesses where you they'll print envelopes, they'll print business cards, temporary business cards while they get the professional ones printed, that sort of thing. They could also be printing labels, so that there's quite a lot that can change depending on what the requirements are. The most common thing with printers is the interaction with what you're printing. The software that you're printing will tend to set the portrait, landscape, and that based on the printing parameters. But you can set them manually in the actual default settings for the printer, landscape, portrait, and you can calibrate all those settings for that at the time. Now, depending on the device, especially if it is a corporate printer, you will be able to add memory. Now, what happens is the more RAM it has, the more storage it has, so it can clear print queues faster and store information locally, so that, for example, you might do a test print, check it, and then just on the device tell it to reprint that last print job for 20 copies or something like that. And that's where printer memory comes into play on those enterprise printers. You will also have firmware, just like with any electronic device today. You can upgrade the firmware to provide additional features on that device. Printer sharing can be enabled via Windows under the Sharing Network and Sharing Center. If you're only in a small office or at home, this is the quickest and easiest way to do it in a lot of circumstances. Excuse me. I forgot to get a drink bottle. So the other option that is becoming more common with printers in today's market is they will have inbuilt Wi-Fi or network cards in them, and you can plug them into your home network and give it an IP address, and you set the printer up connecting to that IP address. So rather than sharing a printer attached to a physical PC, you're actually all sharing a PC that's been configured either via wireless or network settings. And the benefit of this is everybody has access to the device, and a PC doesn't have to be on for you to print to it. Okay, when you're sharing a directly connected printer, the actual PC that connects to the printer needs to be left on so the sharing function can be used. Print servers are there to eliminate that issue, and everybody basically prints to the same server, and then the server will allocate the jobs to the printers based on first come first serve basis. And when somebody's doing a large printing job, it will store all those other print jobs in a much larger queuing system, not relying on the individual memory on the printer. So this becomes more efficient as you get more users using the same resources, and the server is able to provide feedback to the users as to the status of their print job. You obviously need to have a server set up running print server software. Issues can be that the service can slow down depending on network traffic and so forth, and depending on user access, printers might not be available to everyone. Alright, hardware print servers. So basically how this works is we have a dedicated printer service attached to a physical printer. Now obviously that's not the most, that's quite basically the setting up the same as the shared PC. That service, print service, got to be on all the time for all these devices to send work to it, and then for it to push it out to the printer. Whereas a dedicated print server can just set up on the side, and it can have connections to multiple printers, and as work comes to it, it can store in the queues for the printers. And as I said earlier, the benefit of that is you're not relying on the individual device for its memory to queue up all that work. And you're not overloading the printer's I/O, so you get the most efficient output out of the printers as you possibly can as well. Almost over. So depending on the vendor and the type of machine, your maintenance requirements will vary. So it's always recommended that you follow the maintenance processes by the vendor, because each vendor will have their own individual way of maintaining it, and most, especially when you move into the enterprise or commercial printers, you will be able to get spare parts for them quite readily, and you can buy them in kit form even. so that you do a standard maintenance routine. And most of those conform feeding belts, rollers, that sort of things, basically moving parts that wear out over time. So preventative maintenance, so keeping the device clean, replacing the paper, cleaning the various elements carefully with a cotton swab with the correct isopropyl alcohol, and compressed air or lint-free brushes or cloths to remove dust. Now, generally speaking, the ribbons or toner cartridges will need to be replaced, and you'll notice a degradation of output as your toner gets worn out, or your ink cartridges or your ribbons start to degrade. Troubleshooting, again, our standard 6 steps. We see this in every chapter. Identify the problem, come up with a theory of the probable cause, test your theory to see whether it actually is the cause. If your theory is correct, put it into action. So you may not be able to do this within business hours. You might have to take it out into a maintenance window. So resolve the issue and get the products running again. Verify that all the functionality has been reinstated. Document your process, how you fix the problem, and update the status of the repair. Now, most organizations will have a ticket system, so you'll basically need to progress the ticket saying working on it, completed, and users are notified that the issue has been resolved. So again, just going through, there's a whole series of slides that I've just skipped, and they're the standard ones that say open and close questions, We've seen them enough, don't need to go through them again. Read them for the chapter. There will be a couple of pages of common problems and symptoms that you need to match up and go through, just like every other chapter. When we hit the troubleshooting one, now obviously the slides aren't interactive or anything like that, they just give you the one option, so I'll let you go through them on your own. So basically what we've covered in this chapter is there's different types of printers. They use different types of processes to print. They have different costs involved with running. Yep, 1 to 12 as of today. Alright, Kevin. So this last week and this week we basically filled the gap. Okay, so you now should have read from chapters 1 to chapters 12. Okay, so what we've started, the unit we've started today is the SAS unit, which is basically a troubleshooting unit. So each of these chapters and topics that we've been covering via the ITE course has troubleshooting in each chapter. They don't do troubleshooting as a separate item outside as a sole unit or on its own. They've got it embedded in each chapter. So the 2 SAS units that we'll be doing on Mondays will cover hardware and software troubleshooting, and we'll use these 2 units to finish off the ITE course, because we've got a bit of security extra on that, so I'll just throw it in, and then we'll look at coming back and adding the different elements of troubleshooting that hasn't been covered explicitly within each of these individual 14 chapters in the ITE course. Okay, and that's basically it. So basically, as I said earlier, I'll give Network Chuck another plug. I find him quite interesting. He works with David Bombal doing free courses on the internet. Network Chuck used to work for CPT Nuggets, so he's got a lot of experience creating online material, and he presents, I find his presenting style to be easier to follow than David Bombal. David does get there, but he's like me, he gets sidetracked quite a bit, so Network Chuck seems to be a little bit better. But again, unless you've got quick version, let's run it, there it is. Alright, so WSL2, which is the Linux subsystem in Windows 10. If you do not have version 2004 build 19041 or higher, do not do this process. It does not do good things. Like VMware will not run. So not everybody, it took me a week before Microsoft would actually allow me to get the 2004 patch. I had to keep trying for a week before it released. They haven't released it across the board. They've got some form of staged rollout happening. So just be patient. It will provide some flexibility when we're doing virtualized systems and networks. So we can use this when we're setting up, for example, our Windows server. We can have these ping in and access the server from outside where the server's sitting on. But because it's all virtualized on the same host, we have connectivity. It's one way of replicating what we would normally do in a classroom with cables connecting different people together. So yeah, quite a nice virtualization inbuilt in Windows 10, but it doesn't come available until you have this version. So just be aware of that. But yes, I spent a couple of hours playing with it on the weekend. I installed Ubuntu, Kali Linux, and Docker desktop all on Saturday evening. So doesn't take very long and can have quite a nice little benefit to us. Yes, Docker is very powerful. It's going to change the way I teach virtual machines unit going forward, especially if I can get this set up in the classrooms. If I can convince IT support to upgrade the version of the image in the classroom. All right, that's today's hard lesson. So I've already turned on chapters 1 to 12 tests for the week. So if anybody needs to do any of those chapter tests, they're all on for the week. And there's 2 assignments for this module. They are basically a series of questions on each assignment, and we'll come back and discuss them because we've got 2 more chapters for ITE content to go through, and then we'll spend the rest of the time discussing the various elements on the assessments that are covered within all the chapters we've covered for the troubleshooting and processes and some of the tools that we can have to help us troubleshoot, things like that. So I'll stop recording